So let's look at some general rules of argumentation. Certain things that we should be thinking about, if we're making an argument, or if we're trying to analyze an argument and trying to look at how people are formulating an argument, or if it's a sound argument, if it's strong, if it makes sense, if it's logically placed, if it's using sound principles. So let's take a look at these and see like what kind of what that entails. So there's some general rules for good argumentation. And so we want to identify premises and conclusions. We want to you want to develop your ideas in a natural order. You want to start from reliable premises. You want to be concrete and precise. You want to build on substance, not overtone, and you want to make sure that you're using consistent terms. Now, when it comes to identifying premises and conclusion, your first step in an argument is to ask yourself, well, what is it you're trying to prove? This is your conclusion. What is it that you're trying to support, your argument? And the statements that give the reasons for that are your premises. Let's take a look at Sherlock Holmes, for instance. A dog was kept in the stables, and yet though someone had been in and fetched out a horse, the dog had not barked. Obviously, the visitor was someone whom the dog knew well. Now, we have two premises here. One is an explicit premise that, well, the dog didn't bark. It's observable, right? But there's an assumption that Sherlock Holmes is making that, well, dogs bark at strangers. So the inference that he's making is that, well, if dogs bark at strangers, the conclusion that we can bring to, if the dog didn't bark and the dogs barked at strangers, then it was someone whom the dog knew well. So just thinking the way that we set up our premises in order to get to our conclusions is something we should be thinking about. And then you want to make sure you develop your ideas in a natural order. There's two ways of developing the ideas. One is bluff, bottom line up front, where you put your conclusion first and then follow your reasons. Like, for instance, if I were to argue that, the United States should re-enter the Paris Accords as like that first sentence, and then you go into, due to the fact that X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z, this is why that rationale for the Paris Accord should be there. But right up front, you just say what's going on, what the either the thesis statement or the argument is. Or another way you can do it that's equally as legitimate, just depending on what your tastes are, is you can build up your ideas, and you can set up your premises first. Set up like with the increased effects of climate change and the need for international cooperation. The U.S. should re-enter the Paris Climate Accords. So you can draw to your conclusion at the end. But in any case, you want to make sure that you set out your idea in an order that makes sure that it will unfold your line of thought that's going to be most clear to the reader. And that will be at your discretion to see which way that you prefer and are most comfortable with. Like, for instance, I prefer to bluff, but sometimes I'll build up if it's necessary, particularly if I need to put in a lot of background before I actually get to the conclusion. It makes a more natural fit that way. So remember, there's no right or wrong here. It's just whatever tools in your toolbox you'd like to use. Now, we want to make sure that we start from reliable premises. So now, no matter how well you argue from premises to conclusion, the fact of the matter is if your conclusion is going to be weak if your premises are weak. Like, for example, nobody in the world today is really happy. Therefore, it seems that human beings are just not made for happiness. Why should we expect what we can never find? Is this a realistic assumption to be making, that nobody in the world is really happy? No, it's not realistic at all, right? Nobody, none at all. And see, absolutes really cheapen an argument, because if you take the nuance out of it, it makes it really easy to poke holes in an argument or an analysis. So, by using broad terms and just saying nobody or all or never, absolutes don't really work all that well. And if anything, it just hurts you. Or using sources that really push absolutes. If you're quoting someone and they're like being an absolutist about it, it's probably because you're planning on critiquing them. So if you can't argue adequately for your premise, then you probably need to try another premise. If it's not working for you and you can't argue the nuance of it, then you probably need to readjust, maybe introduce some more nuance to what you're talking about. Um, just my last comment on absolutes, it's advisable to not use a language like that. Instead of nobody, you say very few, or a small minority, or a small percentage, or something to the effect of saying, like, it's not, you know, it's not nobody, but it's a small percentage. And so to make a terrible dad joke, never use absolutes. Huh? Oh, you guys are a tough crowd. Never use absolutes. Yeah, using absolute to say not to use absolutes.
It's ironic.
It's fine. Duh, if I don't need your pity, it's okay. I'll keep going. You want to make sure that you're concrete and concise. You want to avoid abstract, vague, and general terms. Let's look at these two sentences that are trying to say the same thing, but one is succeeding far more than the other. We hiked for hours in the sun. That's cool. You can even imagine it in your head. And it sounds so much better than, it was an extended period of laborious exertion. Okay. All right. Well, first off, we don't even know how many people there are in the second sentence. It was an extended period. Well, we don't even know who was in this extended period. As opposed to the first sentence, we know it's plural. We know, at least know that. We know it's two people, well, at least two people. And then extended period. Okay, well, what is that? An hour? 6 hours? A month? Half a year? What does that mean? What is extended period? There's no point of reference, as opposed to hours. Cool. Okay, better frame of reference. We hiked for hours. And we know that it could only have been within 12 hours at the max, because it says in the sun. And so it must have been only during the
day.
The day. Oh, you worry me, you guys. The sun comes out during the
day.
Yay, there we go. We'll work on shapes and colors next. Okay, you guys got me scared. But yeah, the extended period, we don't know what time of day it is, anything like that. And then laborious exertion. Huh? What is that? Is that, is that butter churning? Is that water? Is that jet skiing, witchcraft, glass blowing? What is that? Laborious exertion, as opposed to hiked, simple, direct language. We hiked for hours in the sun. Really helps get the point across a lot better. So don't lose everyone in a fog of words. I know that there's this compulsion sometimes of undergraduates to want to sound fancier than they are, and as a result of that, they end up being less clear. It's okay to have a couple of repetitive words. If you mention the same word a couple of times, it's not the end of the world. And you want to make sure that you're keeping yourself clear and people can understand you. There's no point in sounding really fancy if no one can understand what words you're saying. And so good chance, if you have to keep looking it up in a thesaurus or a dictionary to see like what word you're using, you probably shouldn't be using the word yet. Simple, concise languages can be just really beneficial to getting your point across. So you want to build on substance, not overtone. You want to offer actual reasons, and you don't want to try and make your argument look good by using emotionally loaded words to label the other side. No ad hominem attacks or ad ignorantium or misericordium attacks. Now, if you can't imagine how someone could hold the view that you're attacking, you probably don't understand it yet. The thing I always try and tell my students is that just because you don't agree with something doesn't mean you can't understand it. It's really important to be able to try and understand different points of view, even if you disagree with them. And I think that, that's largely a big problem that we have in political discourse, is that, people can disagree, but no one ever bothers to understand why they disagree. They just know that you're incorrect because you don't believe what I believe. Rawr! as opposed to having a civil discourse about people's logic and rationale, which is a disservice. Do not mind the picture at the bottom. That is not that's not a reference to anything at all. Use consistent terms, by the way. So you want to keep a single theme or thread, and you want to couch your idea in clear and carefully chosen terms, and mark each step by using those same terms. So if you're using the term car, and you're talking about autonomous, self-driving cars, and you say car, and then later on you go and say vehicle, well, you've just said something different, because a vehicle could be a boat or a plane or a train. If you're talking about a car, keep saying you're talking about a car. Don't worry if you sound like you're being repetitive, because logic depends on clear connections between premises and conclusion. So it's essential to use a consistent term for each idea. So don't feel afraid that, oh God, I'm saying the same word a couple of times. That's fine. Now, when it comes to reasoning, there's a checklist of things that we want to be able to identify. For instance, purpose, questions, assumptions, point of view, evidence, concepts and ideas, inferences and conclusions, and implications and consequences. They're really important. So let's take a look at these. So you want to take your time to state your purpose clearly. You want to distinguish your purpose from related purposes, and check periodically to make sure you're still on target, and choose significant and realistic purposes. So the thing is, like, we're taking the time to state the purpose clearly. What is it that you're trying to look at? And what kind of question are you looking to answer? That's why it's really important to state the question and issue clearly and precisely. This is why we make a big deal about whether or not, if you're talking about, gun control, well, what about gun control? Like, okay, I want to do a paper on gun control. Well, that's a great book, but what do you want to talk about actually? And so what we're talking about is things like, okay, do you want to do universal background checks or the assault weapons ban? Or do you want to talk about, limiting, the gun show loophole, or, limiting bump stocks or red flag laws, or what do you want to talk about? So you want to make sure that the question that you're looking at is clear and precise. And, you want to make sure that if you're breaking the question into sub-questions, to see like, well, if we're asking this larger question, what else do we need to know? So if we're doing like universal background checks, well, who would enforce that? What kind of laws do there need to be? What kind of laws are there already? There's analysis that needs to be done within that question in order to really grasp the nature of it. And so that's why it's really important to clearly have a question that you can tackle. And so that's why we spend a lot of time during the controversial research topic workshop, the roundtable, to discuss like, well, what is the question that you're observing, that you're asking, because the question will define pretty much everything that you're going to be doing. And so, all reasoning is based off of assumptions too. You want to clearly identify your assumptions to determine whether or not they're justifiable. And you want to be careful about how your assumptions are shaping your point of view, because, we often have incomplete information. And because we have incomplete information, we tend to fill in the blanks with our biases and assumptions. And just to kind of show you what I mean by that, I would like you all, if you can, to do me a favor. I want you to go into the chat. And so everybody go to the chat window. And I'm going to tell you a quick story, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. Okay? There was a story that happened the other day, last weekend, about a teenager who was shot by a policeman and killed in Ohio. So a teenager was shot and killed by a policeman in Ohio. So I'm going to ask you this first question. And so I want you to type it, but I don't want you to hit the enter button until I count you down. So, because I want everybody to submit their response at the same time. First question. What was the race, color, or ethnicity, whichever term you prefer, of the teenager? So write it down, but don't submit it yet. And I'll count you down in a second. So what was the race or ethnicity or color of the teenager that got shot and killed? Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Interesting. So that was what was in your head. That's what automatically, all right, let's see. All right, and then the next thing, what was the color or race or ethnicity of the police officer? So go ahead and write it down, but don't hit enter yet. And then I'll count you down. So I'm asking you, what do you think? All right, so 3, 2, 1. Wow, that was even faster. Okay, next question. Was the teenager armed or unarmed? 3, 2, 1. Mike, I'm asking in your head, what are you picturing? So interesting, isn't that? All I told you was teenager, was shot and killed by a police officer in Ohio. That's all the information you got. You filled in the blanks that it was African American teenager, unarmed, and a white cop. Because our biases, our cognitive biases are always there. That's the first thing that we picture, because all of our experiences, what we've seen, what we've heard, what we've experienced, what we've felt, all of that colors the way that we think about the world. And it's no different. Like, that doesn't turn off the minute we go into school or do research or go into a professional setting. We still carry those cognitive biases. We still carry those assumptions that we hold about the world. So that being said, it's incumbent upon us to realize that. It's incumbent upon us to be very careful about how we think about our point of view. And there's no such thing as complete objectivity. You can't do it because everyone has cognitive biases. They're just built into us. But what we can do is we can account for them, and we can actively, by being aware of them, we can seek out information that doesn't necessarily jive with what our perspective or point of view of the world is. That's why I was talking about, I mentioned this at the beginning that of the quarter, that bias starts at the research level. Whatever you decide to pick, if you just pick like one source that's talking about something, whatever the bias is, or whatever the assumptions are of that piece, you own. If you do not have a diversification of sources, if your sources aren't varied and diverse, and they're coming from different places, and they're having different perspectives, and even if they're covering the same idea, like we were looking at the hot news, then you are going to own whatever the biases and assumptions are from whatever source you got. So, and so we just have to be able to take that into account, because in terms of thinking about research like that. And so you want to make sure that your reasoning is based upon data, information, and evidence, and you want to restrict your claim to the supported by the data you have, and search for information that opposes the position. And so, and all reasoning is expressed through concepts and ideas. You want to make sure that you identify key concepts and explain them clearly, and make sure, like I said before, that you're keeping consistent terms, because that's going to be, using your concepts with precision, that they're accurately defined, that they're consistently used. And if you do that, then it makes it makes writing your paper easier. It also makes for the reader comprehending what you're writing a lot easier as well. And all reasoning has inferences and interpretations. So you want to infer only what the evidence implies. For example, if you see the number of coronavirus cases going up exponentially, in March, you can't say that they're going to go to 0 in the middle of April. That's not a reasonable assumption. It doesn't jive with what the evidence implies. I'm not referring to anybody in particular, but just saying as an example, hypothetically. And all reasoning, go back. That was the most important slide. All reasoning leads somewhere. It has implications and consequences. Trace the implications and consequences that follow from your reasoning, and what's the negative and positive impacts. We identify the harm. It's really important when you're talking about a debate is identifying the harm. What is it that people find bad about a policy or changing a policy? It's identifying the harm. It's really important. But okay, you identified the harm in the beginning of the paper, but at the end of the paper, I'm like, well, okay, so you change the policy. How does that alleviate the harm? What does that do? Okay, so for example, DACA is reinstated. Great. Well, why does that matter? Like, what are the implications? What does that mean that DACA is reinstated? Or what does that mean that the assault weapons ban is reinstated? What does it mean that encryption backdoors are imposed? What are the implications of that stuff? As we were talking about when we're talking about the outline. It's really, really important for you to talk about that, because it's like you went through all this trouble to write this paper and look at and it's not just because, I told you to, but, you write this paper and you look at the definitions and historical context and all the arguments, the evidence and the quotes and everybody saying yada, yada, yada. And you get to the point and say, okay, and, these are the reasons why people think there should and shouldn't be, but what are the implications of that? What happens if either one of those succeed? And that's really, really important. So let's look at some common fallacies. These are things that you should avoid at all costs. You shouldn't be arguing like this, and you shouldn't accept people's arguments who argue like this, because it is invalid. It's not logically sound. Hence why it's a fallacy. So some common fallacies. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the more common ones that people bump into. So ad hominem attack, ad ignorantium attack, misericordium, circular argument, equivocation, red herring, and strawman. By the way, everybody unmute, because I'd love to be able to hear your reactions to this. So let's go ahead and look at some of, I'm going to go through a definition. I'm going to define each one of these fallacies for you. And then I'm going to have, we're going to get some examples of these fallacies. And a special guest star will describe these fallacies for us. So, ad hominem attack, attacking the person of a source rather than his or her qualifications for reliability or the actual arguments she makes. So, an ad hominem attack is a personal attack. It's an insult, attacking. Ad hominem in Latin means of the body, an attack of the body. Or attack of the person. So it's like saying someone's fat or ugly or whatever or stupid. So. For example, let's look at these two examples. I think our special guest star wants to come in.
Oh, he's gonna play it.
Is this thing on? She gets out there and she starts asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions. You could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever. I watched Hillary last night. We're going to give this, we're going to give that, he said. The poor woman, she's got to give away everything because this maniac that was standing on her right was giving everything away. So she's following. That's what's happening.
Thank you, Donald. Ad ignorantium, arguing that a claim is true because it has not been shown to be false. Arguing, saying, I think there's a teapot around Saturn. And someone says, that's ridiculous. And you say, well, you can't prove that there isn't a teapot around Saturn. So if talking about if Barack Obama's a U.S. citizen.
I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know why he won't release his records.
So, or ad misericordiam, appealing to pity is an argument for special treatment. Kids will usually say this like, hey, don't tell on me or I'll get in trouble. Or students will tell me, hey, professor, you can't give me a bad grade because then I won't graduate. Okay. By the way, that doesn't work. So on the next Republican debate, people realized that we got the short end of the stick when the Democrats had a 2-minute opening and a 90-second closing during the debate, and they had a 3.5 minutes to a 15 million person audience of an infomercial. They get a commercial, we get the Hunger Games.
Oh my God. Don't need it.
Circular argument, implicitly using your conclusion as a premise. Well, we're going to win big, and how we're going to do it? We're going to do it by winning.
I can beat China. When was the last time anybody saw us say beating China in a trade deal? They kill us. I beat China all the time. All the time.
Well,
You
Donald,
gotta do the China.
how are you going to beat China?
Well, we're going to beat China by beating China.
Equivocation. Sliding from one meaning of a term in the middle of an argument. Typically this is, shifting the meaning of a word in the middle of an argument in order for it to seem, to change the terminology, to change the argument. Like, I don't know why they're telling me to make the Yuletide gay. I don't know what sexual orientation has anything to do with Christmas. So things like that. But for example, Donnie, what do you think of John McCain?
He's not a war hero. He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people who weren't captured.
Red herring, introducing an irrelevant or secondary subject and thereby diverting attention from the main subject. And usually the red herring is an issue that people get heated quickly, so no one notices how their attention is being diverted. So, people, you get in trouble with someone and they try and like, hey, you forgot my birthday today, didn't? Well, your dress looks great. If you've ever gotten in trouble with a girlfriend or a boyfriend or anything like that, or your parents, you're trying to change the subject, it's red herring. When talking about immigration,
well, I'd much rather find out whether or not anchor babies are actually citizens because a lot of people don't think they are.
Or a straw man, a caricature of an opposing view, exaggerated from what anyone is likely to hold, so it's easy to refute. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this argument before. You never take out the trash, or why do I always have to wash the dishes, or why do I always need to fold the laundry? Kind of those little disputes you say, and absolutes. There you go. There's a big no-no. But on like Senator Bernie Sanders,
he's gonna tax you people at 90%. He's gonna take everything. And no one's heard the term communist, but you know what? I'd call him a socialist/communist, okay? Because that's what he is.
He actually said that. He actually said socialist / communist and put his hand out and made a little slash sign. I'm not trying to be political. I am simply quoting the man word for word. It just so happens that he talks in rhetorical fallacies all the time, and it just makes my life easy. I wrote this in 2015 thinking, oh, next year I'll probably have to change it. 5 years later, I'm still using it. At least Donnie's given me a lot of mileage out of my lecture.
Yeah.
So just don't argue like the president.
It works.
And then this is just for funsies.
Our country is in serious trouble. China. I beat China all the time. When did we beat Japan at anything? The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems. Mexico, lots of problems. Drugs, crime, rapists. I speak to border guards. In the Middle East, Islamic terrorism, they become rich. I'm in competition with them. They just built a hotel. They took the oil. ISIS has the oil. I love the military, and I want to have the strongest military. Iran is now taking over Iraq. China has our jobs. Mexico has our jobs. Our enemies are getting stronger and stronger by the day. We have a disaster called the big lie, Obamacare. Deductibles are so high, it's virtually useless. Politicians are all talk, no action. I'm meeting with 3 of them in the next week. We need a leader that wrote The Art of the Deal. We also need a cheerleader. We need somebody that can take the brand of the United States and make it great again. I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again. I'm really rich.